of you still eating, and we're all friends, so we can do this in a laid-back way. Please eat and drink your tea whilst we talk. So when we were organising today, and this is something that we've been organising for a while, we had no idea that we would still be in this place with Brexit and that we would be fighting the European elections. And in the last few weeks, when we thought about how are we going to bring this in, we thought obviously we've got to ask Keir Starmer if he can make it, and lo and behold, he said yes. So we're very, very grateful to have the Shadow Secretary for Brexit here with us to answer, I'm sure, many questions that we all have. Just to reflect a bit on kind of why I think that these European elections are so important, and it's really about values. It's about the fact that the Brexit Party is polling so well, and Nigel Farage is now forever on our screens again. And there is a real battle going on out there with a politics of hate and division. And we've been out door knocking recently, just telling people the European elections are happening, because a lot of people that aren't really engaged one way or the other don't even really realise. I mean, Theresa May only admitted that they were happening a few days ago. And it is really, as difficult as this issue is, and I know that many people have switched off because sometimes it's technical and it seems, you know, it just seems like an intractable problem right now, and it's not quite clear how we get through this difficult time, and we all have different opinions. It's just fundamental that we don't ignore it, and that we have this conversation today, and that we do engage in the European elections. We cannot give the far right, Nigel Farage, and Tommy Robinson, and the rest of them a free pass. We cannot do that. Without further ado, I'm going to invite Keir to just give us a bit of an introduction, and then I'm going to ask him some questions and bring you in. Great, thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for inviting me here. It's really great to do a class event again. We did one, I think, about 18 months ago. I didn't realise it was as long as that since I've done an event with you. And it's really good to be here with Unite the Union, of which I'm a member. So it's great to be here. And Tam Pfizer here as well, who came to our constituency Labour Party about 5 or 6 weeks ago and did a brilliant speech for our members, which was really, really inspiring for them. So it's great to be back sharing a platform here with her. And I managed to combine this with doing some canvassing this morning for the EU elections here in Bristol. So it's been a very productive day so far. And we had a really positive response on the doors this morning. I know we always say that. We always do the sort of photos at the end of the day saying great response on the door, whether it has been or not. And it is difficult across the country. I've been in various different places the last sort of 2 or 3 weeks. But this morning it really was. It felt very upbeat here in Bristol. So that's great. I was just going to do a quick 10-minute overview. And then I think we're going to get into a conversation and get into questions, because I'm well aware that probably what you want to do is to ask me questions so that you can hear firsthand where I think we are with some of the issues that are still out there circling around. And rather than dive into the sort of technicalities of the talks or anything like that, which we can touch on, I just wanted to bring it back up to put it into a better framework, because I think we missed the opportunity to do that. And the first thing for me always is this, that the Labour Party is an internationalist party. And that's not our positioning on the EU, it's been our positioning for over 100 years. As the Labour Party was formed, the sort of movement of the left, the trade unions came together, they immediately saw that if you were going to be progressive, if you were going to change things from a left perspective, you had to be internationalist. And so we've always been an internationalist party. We have always thought that we needed to work with progressives in other countries to fight shared battles in solidarity with them. That's a fundamental principle, that sort of sense of collaboration and cooperation to make things better in not just one country, but across a whole range of countries. So that's not an EU positioning, it's not a tactical positioning just for the time being. It's there deep, deep, deep in the DNA of the Labour Party, and that's why we campaigned to remain in the EU. I don't think anybody in the Labour Party, or very few people, think the EU is perfect. But what we did recognise was that if you want to collaborate and cooperate on the things that really matter, including things like climate change, including things like how do you stop multinational companies avoiding paying tax, including things about how do you have a common platform or floor of work, of rights for people at work, so you're not putting workers in France and Germany in competition with workers in this country, it was better to be in a club where you could share those values, albeit Remain and Reform was the slogan. Obviously, as we realised the results coming in and recognised that the campaign that we had been campaigning for had lost, it caused real difficulties for the Labour Party in terms of where we position ourselves and where we go next. I think we did the right thing after the referendum by saying we accept the result and we will give space to the Prime Minister to negotiate a deal. We said to her when she started the exercise, a 2-year exercise, that we wouldn't vote for whatever deal she brings back. It would have to be the right deal, but it was right to give her that space to do that negotiation. And off she went and did it. She started in the wrong place and she's ended in the wrong place. And there are so many examples of that, we haven't got time to go through them. But the first thing she should have done was to say, come what may, and unilaterally, I will guarantee the rights of EU citizens in the UK. She should have said that within days of the result, because as you know and I know, many people here from the EU, been here many years, have felt completely unsettled by what has gone on, and to have done that up front would have been an incredibly important gesture about the sort of country that we would continue to be, but she didn't do it. She said, well, I'll wait and see what other countries do. I'll hold back on what I could do until I see what other countries have done. Really bad start. And then, of course, she set out her red lines about the customs union, single market, and all the rest of it, which inevitably meant that she had made it increasingly difficult for her to bring back a decent deal. And she must be the first Prime Minister in a very long time to have put immigration, control of immigration, as the sort of #1 policy priority across Europe, above working people, above jobs and the economy, and to say that is it, that security of our borders and stopping freedom of movement has to be the #1 objective, and everything else flows from that. But we were right to give her the space to do that negotiation. When she's come back with a bad deal, as she has, we're right then to reject it. And whatever people say about the Labour vote, and there are different views within the PLP, etc., if you look at the vote on the deal that the Prime Minister brought back, and we voted on it 3 times, the Labour Party has been very united in saying that is the wrong deal for the country, and voting it down. Of course, the first time it was voted down by 230 votes, a historic high. But now, I mean, that deal that the Prime Minister achieved, the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration, they were first published on the 14th of November and adopted by the EU on the 25th of November last year. And here we are 6 months on with the same deal in this impasse and inability of this Prime Minister to go forward. Now, the truth is, she should have resigned on the night she lost by 230 votes. She should have resigned then. To simply limp on has put us in this position where nobody can really find a way forward. But she should have gone that night. And now people want us to break the impasse. And it's in those circumstances that we, the Labour Party, have said, if that's the deal that we brought back, it is now important, if you want to proceed on that deal, that you ask the public whether that's good enough. Because it's not, you can't just force this through now. It's almost, on the one hand, to protect us from a bad deal, that we need to ask the public what they think of it. It's also really to get permission to go forward. If you voted leave, is this what you voted for? And therefore, although people say, well, the Labour Party has sort of had an ambiguous position, that's not actually true. We went into the EU elections, into the referendum, knowing what we were fighting for. We came out saying we have to accept the result, we need to allow the negotiations to go on. We've now got to the end of the negotiations and we've said the deal's not good enough, we've got to find a way to break the impasse. And the only way to break that impasse, if it's this deal, is to ask the public whether or not this is good enough for them. And that's where we're at. And obviously there are talks going on with the government at the moment, and they've been going on for 4 or 5 weeks. But as you can imagine, there are really sticky issues in those talks. The first is what are the terms of any deal that we could agree, because we've been very clear that if you're going to support manufacturing in the United Kingdom, you need to be in a customs union. If you're going to support services in the United Kingdom, you need to be very close to the single market. And if, as we must, we're not going to put in jeopardy the Good Friday Agreement, then you need both. And so there's fighting on that substance issue is a massive battleground in the talks. There are then two other issues that are really important. The first is how on earth do you future-proof any deal with this Prime Minister against an incoming Prime Minister? Because the one thing we know about this Prime Minister is she's about to step down. And I thought John McDonnell put it brilliantly on the MAR programme last Sunday morning, if you called it, when he said it's like trying to do a deal with a company that's about to go into administration. Because, as soon as there's a deal done, this Prime Minister's stepping down. And every time we meet to have the talks, wannabe Tory leaders do make various comments about how quickly they're going to rip up anything that's agreed and how much they hate things like the customs union. So, and the other issue at the talks is obviously the question of a confirmatory vote, because whatever anybody's individual views on whether a referendum or confirmatory vote is a good idea or a bad idea, there are probably 120 up to 150 Labour MPs who have not voted for a deal unless it's got a confirmatory vote with it. So if the whole point of the exercise is to get a stable majority, you can't ignore that and pretend that it isn't there, because this is only going to work if the Labour team is united and presents as a united vote. So that's where we're at. I think you'll probably have lots of questions on that. I just wanted to take it back really a bit to where I started, because this battle we're having about Brexit, which is absorbing all of our time and energy, is not in isolation. Almost every EU country, and obviously in America as well, there is this battle of values that's going on in a way that I had not anticipated in my lifetime. Before I became an MP, I was a human rights lawyer for many, many years, and I was really struck with the idea of what happened at the end of the Second World War, when countries came together, horrified by what had happened in and by Nazi Germany, and agreed simple standards, human rights standards, that would be applicable across the globe and enforceable. Simple ideas of equality, peace, dignity, non-discrimination. And I thought that those values, tolerance, that those values had already been established, and the only question was how much harder, how much further we could push them. But now we're back in that fight, and you can see that with what's called populism, probably a misuse of the word across Europe, and also in this country with Farage and others, this sense of being anti-establishment. And you can see why you might want to be anti-establishment. There's nothing wrong with being anti-establishment and pushing back against the establishment. That is a very good thing, and I think most of us should want to do it. But it's badged as that, but it actually is a form, certainly with the Brexit Party and some of the other parties across Europe, it's a form of intolerance, of division and hatred. And that fight for values is very, very much on. And one of the big things we're saying in the EU elections is that this now, and one of the reasons to vote Labour, is because it's about values. It's about whether you want to be a tolerant, welcoming country, or whether you are prepared to have this country sort of descend into intolerance. And we've got to be absolutely in that fight. But the other thing that I think we don't talk about enough in relation to Brexit is that in many respects, I think the Brexit vote was the clearest evidence yet of the extent to which our political and economic system is broken and has not worked for millions and millions of people. And I often ask myself why that phrase, take back control, had such resonance. And I think it had resonance because the more people asked themselves whether they had sufficient control over their lives, the more people said no, whether it was at work, in terms of the decisions made at work, whether it's in terms of wealth and inequality, and whether they've got control over their own budgets, because lots of people have had their wages suppressed for a very long time. We've got, the biggest group of people in poverty are working people. I mean, how mad is that? That is a burning injustice that working people are in poverty. You've got huge health inequality. In my constituency in North London, because it's a London constituency, it's very compact. It's only about 2.5, 3 miles long, about 1.5 miles wide. The life expectancy between the rich areas, Primrose Hill, and some of the deprived areas, Somerstown, the life expectancy difference is 10 years. 10 years, and there's that locked-in structural inequality that you saw, exacerbated by the '08 crash and then austerity that sort of followed it, I think built up this sense in people of injustice that spilled out in that referendum. And one of my frustrations, certainly in my role now, is that I spend most of my time on the technicalities of what's the right deal with Europe. And we're not spending enough time on the other question, which is what the hell are we actually going to do in the United Kingdom to deal with the root causes of this baked-in inequality. And I think in the end, we've got to, as a movement, as a party, we've actually got to be much bolder than we've been until now. I think the 2017 manifesto that we put out was very good. It had hope written through it. The only question I've got is whether we went far enough. I actually think we've got to be even more bold than that. We've got to be more radical than that. And we have got to advocate, I think, a power shift, a real power shift, whether that's in the workplace, whether that's in politics away from Westminster, whether it's regional, so that it's away from London and the South East, and certainly in wealth and health. We need a power shift that goes with that radical programme. So for me, what may seem a technical issue of Brexit actually is a very, very political issue about the sort of society that we want to live in and the sort of change that we've got to make if we're serious about solving the Brexit issue. And this idea that we could just get on with it by passing a deal one night and it'll all go away, I think fundamentally misunderstands the political situation that we're in. We're in this place, I think, because of those structural inequalities. We've been far too relaxed about the way our political and economic system has worked for far, far too long. And if there's anything positive to come out of Brexit, it is that we roll up our sleeves and get to grips with the bigger changes that are now needed in order to ensure that we move past that structural inequality and use it as an opportunity to rebuild the United Kingdom in a way that reflects the values of the Labour Party, of the wider Labour movement of trade unions, and that is back to where I started, truly international. Thank you.
I was going to ask a question. Is this on? No. I was going to ask a question, but actually I might just throw it open at this stage because I know that people will have their own questions to ask. We've got 20 minutes or so before Keir needs to go. Do people want to ask? All right. So we can start here. We can move backwards. Yeah, do you want to shout? I'm not sure that these... Is this working?
Yeah, it's working. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Keir. Thanks for coming to Bristol. My name's Kaz. I'm from
Can
Bristol
people
North
hear?
West.
I don't think it's working. Yeah, sorry. Can I try this one? Sorry.
Bristol North West.
Yeah.
That's it.
Bristol North West Labour Party, represented by Dan Jones. So I think I also work in aerospace, and I'm a pro-Remain person. So Labour have been accused of sitting on the fence. I see this next election as a kind of de facto European Remain or Leave election. Hate Farage and the Brexit Party. Why should we really consider voting Labour?
Should we do three in a row then?
Yeah. Okay. On the middle here, and then we'll split back up. Yeah.
Thank you for coming. Hello? Yeah.
Yeah.
If Remain was the best option leading up to the referendum, what has changed? Well, the main thing surely is that the country's now 3 years worse off under the Tories. Would it not make sense for Labour to say, sod this, we're revoking Article 50, we're going to stay in the EU at least for the next 10 years while we sort out the mess the Tories have made and put the country first. So we go back, we turn it on them. We want to put this country first.
I know that lots of people want to ask. Just hand it back a couple of ways.
Hi, I'm a French citizen living in Bristol for 25 years, and I'm speaking for all the 3 million, and hopefully that you know who they are and where we're going to be, what's our future, because I've been happy living in Bristol, and England's my second home, and I'm feeling a big question mark where we're standing.
Okay, I'll try and do these quickly so we can get through a whole series of questions. I think we've got a little bit more than 20 minutes, so we'll take a bit of
great.
extra time if
Yeah.
we can, because I want to do as many questions as possible. On the first question, sitting on the fence, why Labour? Just a few things about that that are really, really important, because since I've been in post, people on either side of the argument have been saying, just jump one way or the other. Just represent the 52% and sod the 48, or just represent the 48 and sod the 52. And I've resisted that, because I think that's wrong in principle. I don't think that the Labour Party can aspire to, or properly want to govern the country, if it only can speak for or to half the country. It just cannot. So we have got to make sure that we fully understand and respect what people voted for and why they voted for. And we've got to have a vision, a way of taking our country forward in which the vast majority of people say, there's a better future there for me and my family and my community. And if you simply go for one or the other, I think it's wrong in principle. I know very well why I voted Remain. Absolutely know why I voted Remain. Rooted in the values I've had all my life. But I also respect the fact that people did vote Leave for reasons that are really dear to them in terms of what they thought was best for them and their family, etc. And that's why, when I was campaigning in the referendum, I was saying to people, this is for real, you've got to get the vote because big decisions are going to be made. And when the vote went the wrong way, I was not going to get up the next morning and say, well, we lost that, so we're not going to take any notice of that. I just don't think that was a credible position for us. I think what we did was right, which was to say, okay, we respect it, we allow the negotiations, but we are not allowing exit on any terms. I mean, if it's not the right terms, then we need to reconsider. I think that's a perfectly logical position for us to find ourselves in. And people should vote Labour because it's Labour that stopped us leaving with this bad Brexit deal. People say we're not doing anything. We would have left already with Theresa May's deal if Labour hadn't blocked it. 3 times we've stood together and blocked it. So when people say we haven't done anything, get a backbone, all the rest of it, actually we've done it. We stood together, we said that's not good enough. We are not leaving on those terms, and it wouldn't have happened without the Labour Party. For those that think there now ought to be a public vote, and obviously I've advocated that very strongly, again, vote Labour because the Greens, the Lib Dems, the SNP, Plaid, etc., they can't deliver a public vote. Where that Labour vote, 250 or so votes goes in Parliament, will determine what happens next. You can't ignore the Labour Party in this. You can pile up your votes for your other parties, but it's the Labour Party that holds 250 or so votes, and therefore what we do and how we position ourselves is vitally important. And therefore, voting Labour but pushing Labour in the direction in which you think it should be pushed, because what the members say, what the trade unions say, really matters more in this Labour Party than at any point. I think that's the proper way to look at it. And I actually think that journey over 2 years, it is perfectly legitimate now to ask a different question, which is not, do you want to rerun the referendum? A different question, which is this deal good enough for you? Is a perfectly acceptable position for us to be in. The other thing, just on the narrow EU point, is if people don't vote Labour and we don't have a strong Labour vote in these EU elections, Farage will be the winner. So the choice is not really a sort of nice choice between which bit of Remain party do you like. It's, do you want Farage to win or don't you? I mean, if you don't vote like Labour, you increase the chance of Farage winning. And that's not just, the gall of the man. It's the fact that you have this politics which is of false promises and no responsibility. False promise. And people say to me, why don't you just get on with it? Just get on with it. Well, get on with what? Get on with delivering the promises that you made and couldn't keep. 350 million quid to the NHS. That was the first promise. The second was the EU love us so much, they're so dependent on us economically, they'll give us what we want. Probably give us a better deal than one we're in now. That was David Davis's position. All those BMW cars are going to swing it in the end. Well, it didn't work out like that. That was a false promise. And then the third promise was, because we're the United Kingdom and we'll be global, countries will queue up to do brilliant trade deals with us. Say, oh, well, we wouldn't have done this with any other country in the world, but you're the United Kingdom, so here's a brilliant deal. Just not going to happen. You can't just get on with that. It feeds into the second question. I don't think you can have a referendum where you say to 35 million people who voted, thanks very much for your vote, we've just decided to revoke it. I just don't think Parliament can do that. I think if there is to be a change, it's got to be done by the public. It's got to be approved by the public, and I don't think Parliament can just revoke it. But if in the end the public don't like the deal, then of course the default or the other option ought to be Remain. And I know that's hotly debated in our party, but I've never shied away from the fact that if there was another question, Remain should be one of the options. I personally would both campaign and vote to Remain, and we'd have to see what the result was. On French citizens, I mean, one of the things that pains me most about Brexit is the idea that somehow we are less welcoming, less international, less concerned about international obligations and responsibilities. And on the morning of the referendum, once it was clear what the results was, I sat with my two children. I've got a little boy and a little girl. The boy's now 10 and the girl's 8. So they were 7 and 4 respectively, 7 and 5 respectively on the morning of the election. And I just looked at them, and I wasn't talking about the customs union or single one. I was just looking into their faces and thinking, what kind of world are you going to grow up in? I really feared that we would turn in on ourselves, become intolerant, and lose that internationalism and that welcoming way in which we generally have dealt with people from other countries. And I think we've got to really, really fight that, because the idea that people from the EU feel unsettled or unwelcome is really problematic in this country. And I've had people into my surgery. I had someone very early on, a woman, a French woman actually, and she just asked a simple question. She said, I've got a child who's 4, due to start in primary school next year. Should I go now? Because I don't want to get him into school and have to leave, pull him out of a school and move to another country. It's just awful. I mean, it's just such a low moment that somebody had to come into my... She's actually been here for many, many years, and realistically will be here for a long time and wasn't really at any risk of any of that. But the fact that people feel it means that those sort of decisions go on. And I know that people have left the United Kingdom out of some of our public services, etc., because of that fear. And that's where it goes back to this argument about values. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to add a question from the start. I'm like really trying not to hog your time. So one of just picking up on that. So obviously, this point about immigration, which was of course central to the referendum, and what's happening with EU immigrant rights, and we know that people are getting refused visas, and they are getting a different answers for their kids versus them, for instance. And the problem that could end up happening, of course, is that that they are treated separately, that we end up in a Windrush 2.0 type situation, and that also, instead of levelling up everyone's rights, we are going to level them down. And I'm sure a lot of people here are thinking about it, and I know that the director of JCWI is here, to think about what we do on freedom of movement. And I think for a lot of us it's quite important as a matter of values to say that we want to continue to support freedom of movement. So I'll add that to your list. Other questions? Over here, thanks.
Hi Keir, thanks for coming along. I'm Matt, I'm a Labour member in Bristol. I'm broadly supportive of Labour's position of respecting referendum result, trying to stay in a customs union, the single market, although I voted Remain myself. But if we're on the doors in working class areas, Lotley, some areas of Thornbury near where I live, what are we going to say to people who voted Leave, especially people that we need to be looking after, people who are vulnerable on low incomes, but that want to leave and have been sold the snake oil, if you like, that leaving the EU and ending free movement is best for them? We really need to change their minds. We can't just tell them they're wrong. What do we say to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously a really central point. We have to think about what we say to Remain, but what do we say to our Leave voters? And actually what you found is that people have become more entrenched on both those. So I really liked Jeremy Corbyn's line this week about, we're not the party of the 52%, as you reiterated, 48%, but how do you start bringing those people together and not end up saying different things to different people? This in the purple here, thanks.
If we did end up with a people's vote, could you see a situation where Labour MPs, Labour members could go out and talk to people about what they actually want, not necessarily there wouldn't be necessarily a line of Labour's going to take a Remain line or Labour's going to take a vote for whatever the other option is on the deal. Could that possibly work? And also, if we did push for a general election, what would it say then in our manifesto?
Big question. Yeah.
If we were to have a confirmatory vote or that sort of thing, we know that during the last one there was a lot of sort of hatred and stuff built up by it. Wouldn't that have a possibility of happening again? And especially if there was another Leave vote, how would we deal with that?
Great set of questions. Starting with immigration. Two or three things about that. We in the Labour movement have to make sure that every time we talk about immigration, we start by saying thank you to people who've come to this country to live here with us. And we very often, you hear it, Labour politicians over and over again will start the conversation on immigration by saying, oh, I know we've got an issue here or an issue there. Actually, thank you is the appropriate start for people who've chosen to come to this country to live their lives and be part of our communities. The second thing we need to do is to get away from the idea that people have contributed and therefore under the unwritten contract they're allowed to be here. Actually, people have come here for all sorts of reasons, made all sorts of different contributions to our society, and contributing, which normally means working and paying your tax. It's not a contract, it's about how human beings live together in communities together as friends, as neighbours, and part of the same community. So we need to start the debate in the right place. I think we, the Labour Party, made a big mistake by not having an open discussion about immigration for a very long time. This is not just an EU issue. I feel that for many, many years we've not been open and honest about what does a fair and ethical framework actually look like. We've got too drawn into narrow discussions. We've not been strong enough on the EU versus non-EU divide. In my constituency, and you can see why there's the fear factor about what's going to happen in the future, for EU citizens, there has been freedom of movement and a genuine sense of welcomeness. You know, if you want friends or relatives to come and visit you from your country, that is perfectly fine. But if you're a non-EU citizen, certainly in my casework, in my constituency, I have case after case after case of people who I hear from non-EU countries who, when they want to bring a family member here, they have a default position from the Home Office that they're obviously trying to break the rules. And that's, I mean, the hostile environment at its most extreme was the Windrush experience. But actually the general hostile environment is there across the piece, which is the assumption that if you're from a non-EU country, you are probably trying to break the rules. And the Home Office has got to catch you out. It's the same assumption, by the way, that DWP has about getting people into work, which is that you obviously don't want to get back into work, so my job is to catch you out. It's a deeply embedded cultural instinct that is there that I think runs absolutely through our immigration system, and that's why we cannot level down here. We need to level up as we go forward. And I actually think that, you know, I do realise immigration is a hot issue. It's interesting how it's gone down in terms of the heat in the discussion over the last 2 or 3 years. But it is a hot issue. But actually, if we were to get a blank piece of paper, each and every one of us in this room, and just say, what are the principles that you think are fair? I think most people would say, look, we've always welcomed people to work in this country, and the idea that people in this country can go work somewhere else. We've never really gone down the route of saying family members can't live together. That's just not the kind of society we are. We want the students to come here to study, and we want people in this country to go and study elsewhere. And we absolutely need to comply with our refugee obligations. And I think if you just started from those principles and worked up, you'd find that we could get a more positive route, which didn't take us into the place of, you know, numbers or quotas or, you know, you're only worth having if you can earn a certain amount of money. And I think the sooner we get into that space, the better, because we're going to need it now, like we've never needed it before. Matt, on the question of what do we say in Leave or Remain areas, the first thing I think is, in my experience around the country, lots of people who voted Remain voted for different reasons and with different strengths of feeling, and the same on the Leave side. And one of the mistakes we've made in the last 2.5, nearly 3 years, is to assume there's a sort of group think that if you put your tick in one box, you think all these things. If you put your tick in the other box, you think all the other things. Actually, it's not like that. Some people were very, very, very strong Remain. Some not so much. Some thought, well, on balance, I don't much like the EU, but I think it's probably better in. Equally on the Leave side, some people said, I just want to be out at any cost, don't care. Others said, well, I don't know, but I think it's better out. I quite like that sovereignty stuff. Others said, I don't know, it might be just better out. So lots of, so we mustn't get into the group thing. And we mustn't also get into the idea that some places are Leave and some places are Remain. The truth is, if you look across the map of the United Kingdom, every area was mixed. It was just a different mix. And the percentages vary, but it was a mixed readout in different areas. But of course, we do have people who voted Leave, and we are picking them up on the doorstep who are saying, why don't you get on with it? Which bit of my vote did you not understand? And I mean, for me, I feel very strongly in the sense that in my constituency is in Camden. In Camden there was a very high Remain vote. We're still looking for those that didn't vote Remain. It was that high.
Yeah.
And as if I do a trip somewhere like Stoke, I go from Euston Station, and as I go to the station, I've got people sort of stopping me saying, why can't you just stop Brexit here? Get out the other end at Stoke, and you get people saying, why haven't you delivered? Which bit of my vote didn't you hear? But we do need to think about how we address that. I don't personally think that we can win the argument on the technicalities. I have not knocked on a doorstep where someone says, well, I really like your customs union position. As for customs association, I don't like that. I want a comprehensive customs union, not customs association. That isn't a place where we can win the argument. We're only going to win the argument by saying, what are we going to change about your life, your community, the structural reasons why you felt like that in the first place, and be genuine and deliver on it. So it's got to be, have we got the right answer for them? Have we really thought it through? And like all elections, can someone look you in the eye and say, I trust you to deliver that for me? And I think we've got to move on to that territory. I don't think we're going to win it on the technicalities. But we do need to win those votes. Remainers, for want of a better word, in the Labour Party are very good at revving up other Remainers. That's a nice, easy thing to do. It makes you feel good. But if you're going to change, if there's going to be a confirmatory vote, if there's going to be a further public say on this, the critical question for everybody who wants to remain is, have you any time lately persuaded someone who voted the other way to vote differently? Because if you're just going to persuade the same people to vote the same way again, you're not going to get very far. So it's a critically important discussion to have. If there's a public vote, will everybody have to follow the line? It depends what the line is. And knowing the Labour movement as I do, I doubt it. Because people will take different views on this, and it's very, very hard to force people to argue for something they don't want to argue for. My own view is the Labour Party should take a strong line and have strong leadership. But if there is to be a further campaign and vote on this, I think it needs to be run very differently to last time. I think that it's got to be something which is much more regional based, that it's away from some of the leading lights in the sort of PV camp at the moment. It's got to be people who are able to make a much more passionate argument actually about workers, about the environment, about different parts of the country, etc. On what will be in the general election manifesto, well, I don't know. That will, we've got a process for the manifesto, as everybody knows, and we'll have to go through that process. But what I'm acutely aware of is that, quite rightly, we're a members-led party. Quite rightly and happily, we've got 500,000 members, and then the affiliated trade unions around that, as we've always had. And it's very important that whatever we have in our manifesto represents what our members and supporters, that family of people, think is the right way forward for our country. And I think they're pretty firmly in the camp of wanting some ability of the public again to have a view on this. On the final question, if there is any issue of going back to the public, won't it whip up hatred and violence? I don't know. That is possible. Certainly we live in an environment now where very many MPs have had serious death threats. A number of my colleagues have got people in custody or on charges in court because of death threats, and that's, as you can imagine, a disturbing environment in which to work. I'm not talking about people who are just rude on Twitter. I mean, there's yards of that every day. That's just the way it is. It's actually credible. If you have a credible death threat, it means that a member of your staff has probably received the threat. So, you know, most MPs have younger staff in their 20s or 30s who are having to receive this, who are then having to make witness statements and potentially having to appear as witnesses. If the MP's got family, it means the police have to go to the house, talk it through with the family, put security in. This is deeply disturbing, particularly if you've got children. It's very difficult to explain what's going on. But that is the environment which we're working. But should we be changed by it? No. And once we allow the argument to become, well, there might be a reaction, and therefore we won't do it, we've lost our anchor. We've completely lost our anchor. And in the end, we will give more and more and more to those that advocate hatred, division, and violence. We cannot allow that to happen. So the mere fact that some people may react in a particular way is not a strong enough reason not to. And, you know, I was lucky enough to be elected to Parliament on the same day as Joe Cox, who became a dear friend of mine. And Joe would never, ever countenance the argument that because of violence you would change your view and act in a different way. And I would very much take her view on that.
Thank you. I mean, I guess picking up on that though, I think there is a point about how we prepare, how we, you know, make sure that we're in a safer position in the ways that we can do, because if it does whip up hatred again. And just to add to that, there was obviously some electoral fraud in the Leave campaign. And I'm not quite sure what's going to prevent that from happening again too. It'd be interesting if you could pick that up. Okay, I'm going to take 3 final questions. Yeah.
Pass this down.
Hi, I wondered if we're going to have a people's vote if people have done a lot of registration with young people. Sorry. If people have done registration with young people, because I think a lot of the outcome will depend on that. And you say that the referendum will have to be run in a different way. I'd like to see some idea of BBC balance changing. Have you done anything about that?
Is there anyone on this side that wants to right at the back over there? Yeah.
Hi, I just want to ask, when Labour gets in, if it's a general election, how long will it take for them to clean up Theresa May's mess?
It's a broader question there. I mean, the Brexit mess on its own. Yeah, this is the same. Just have these two. You can ask your question afterwards quickly.
I'm pleased you had a positive experience canvassing, but I'm afraid that Totterdown was hand-picked to ensure you would. If you walked 1 mile down the road, you would have been in Field and Knoll West, and I have experience of canvassing there. I agree totally with you. We have to convince those people that we have the answers to their problems, but the problem is that that area and other areas in the country have had Labour governments or Labour MPs for a very long time, and they still have the intractable problems of people not going to education, higher education, lack of employment, lack of basic facilities like shops in their area. I can't knock on their door and say, I understand why you vote Leave, but don't vote Leave this time. And unfortunately, one of the answers within the Labour Party is just to not go and knock on their doors, which I fight against all the time. How do we get Labour activists into those areas and not frightened of having those discussions? And how do we have a story to tell those people that they're going to believe? Because if we don't do that, we haven't solved the problem.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Yeah. I mean, and of course we get into some of that today. So today we're like looking at what sort of things, lines and narratives and stories we can tell in the economy, so it'd be really helpful. If you've got a good story or something that's happened where you've knocked on a Leaver store and it's you have managed to convince them. And it's very difficult. Yeah.
Recognising the arithmetic in the House of Commons, how can you engineer a confirmatory vote?
So are you saying that there isn't the numbers there? Is that what you, yeah.
How are you going to make it happen?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, let's rattle through those. On electoral fraud, we know there was fraud in the referendum because it's already been found by the Electoral Commission. And what they found was the deliberate moving of money between different parts of the campaign in breach of the rules in order to hide where the money was coming and where it was going. And they've also found that a lot of that money was then used for things like data mining in ways which are almost certainly against the law as well. And some of that is still being investigated. And that's really serious, and you can see this not just in the referendum, but in other elections across the globe. We've got to deal with it. One of the problems we've got, one of the conversations we'll have to have in due course is whether or not the Electoral Commission has got enough powers. Because in an ordinary election where you're electing a candidate, it is possible to disqualify the candidate for breach of the rules. Remember Phil Wallace, who was, I think, an immigration minister in the last Labour administration, because of a breach of the electoral rules, he was actually disqualified from office, having been re-elected as an MP. So there are real consequences. For a referendum, there aren't. There's nothing in the powers of the Electoral Commission, or if it goes into a criminal investigation in the courts, to do anything about the result. And if we're to have any more referenda, then we're going to have a serious discussion about what the powers of the Electoral Commission are. As for registration and young people, we absolutely need to register young people. It's one of the things that happened in 2017. It was a very good thing too. I think one of the ways to persuade people to register is to lower the the voting age to 16, and to make it clearer to young people that what they actually say is going to be listened to. Because most political parties have worked on the rule of thumb, but because older people vote, you should pitch your message to older people and not listen as much as you should to younger people. And that's a massive mistake. It's not just a question of, saying to younger people, you've got to register. You've got to register and we're going to listen to what you've got to say. But we don't need people to register to listen to what they've got to say. We can actually go out and talk to younger people more than we do. And I think we need to do that much more. On this third and fourth question, which I kind of want to take together, which is how long is it going to take to clear up Theresa May's mess? And what do we say in some of the areas where people feel let down, not just by Brexit, but by Labour and previous administrations? I think that's a really fundamental question, because I don't think it is just Theresa May's mess, although she has made a lot of mess. I actually think that the period of politics we're living through is probably the tail end of what Thatcher started. In other words, she had a political and economic thesis about, privatisation, that profits and sort of unbridled capitalism in the end is better. That reversal of everything that's gone on in terms of economic thinking since the Second World War, she turned that on its head into that neoliberal, aggressive neoliberal model upon which she based all of her decisions. And Labour, to some extent, tinkered with it and did good things with it, but didn't fundamentally dismantle it. And therefore, the mess we're living with is not necessarily just Theresa May's mess. It's actually a mess that's gone on, or at least can be traced back, I think, to some of those decisions that were made under the Thatcher era. This whole sort of privatisation is good, public is bad. They're all the themes that run through that. And so, in the end, and they have dragged Labour in. I think, at various points, people have felt, well, Labour's been too timid. It hasn't fundamentally changed some of the things that needed changing. It's taken the edges off it rather than fundamentally changed it. And I think we've got to actually hold that up to the light and ask ourselves more searching questions. Whether I don't think it's a question. I think we're going to win again by just simply saying, well, we'll do some of these. We'll manage this slightly differently, but using the same sort of economic and political basis. I think we've got to recognise that we need to go back to some pretty fundamentals here, so that we can deliver in a different way for people. Because this is about trust, and the EU is just a symptom of that. I don't think it's the only cause of that. On the arithmetic, look, the arithmetic changes in Parliament all the time, the numbers voting for Theresa May's deal has changed each time it's been put. It hasn't got through yet, but it's changed. The numbers who are interested in things like a single market customs union has changed. There are many Labour MPs who this time last year would have taken your right arm off for a single market customs union, and now say I won't settle for anything less than a confirmatory vote. And so views change, numbers change in this. So I don't think any of the numbers are fixed. When a confirmatory vote was put up for a vote in the indicative votes, we got 203 Labour MPs voting for it, and we got within 12 votes of winning it. That may be the high point, in which case you may be proved right, but I think these numbers move around depending on where we're at in the cycle. And all we know at the moment is that pretty well every proposition that's been put up, all 8 indicative votes, all didn't get a majority. So we've got to think more radically about how we break that deadlock, I'm afraid. I'm really sorry to have to rush off, but I've got to go back to do various things. But can I just...
Can you just say one thing that you would want people in this room to do as well?
One thing I'd like you to do, well, in the next 12 days, is to persuade one person, to persuade another person, to persuade another person to vote Labour. if everybody persuaded one person to it, but also persuaded that person to go on and get somebody else to do it, that would be really fantastic. I am genuinely worried about the idea of the Brexit party being the biggest party in the United Kingdom in terms of the reputational damage that will do to the United Kingdom, because the rest of the world will not scrabble around and say, oh, I can see there's a bit of Green here, a bit of Lib Dem there, a bit of Change UK if they still exist there. They will just see the big ticket item, which will be, oh, look at the United Kingdom. That's turned into this Farage land. And we've already done a lot of reputational damage in the last 2 or 3 years. And being thought of as a country in Europe that is the country of Farage is really, really dangerous. And that's not just about tactical electioneering. I'd always tell people to vote Labour, you know, in every ward, in every borough, every region and across the country. This is actually, I think, about the symbolism of it. So if everybody here can persuade somebody else, and that person themselves persuade somebody else, and we could do a lot of that by in the next 12 days, we can turn that around. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Today, and I know he has to rush off now, and not just giving us his time and being open, I think very open and honest, and taking so many questions, but also all of the work you do on this incredibly difficult issue.
All the pleasure.
And when if we ever manage to get through this and it's over, what is the thing that you want to work on next?
Oh, changing the economy fundamentally.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Nice to see you. Sorry to rush. Bye-bye now.